So welcome and thank you for joining us for this session titled From Business Risk to Patient Safety, a discussion on cybersecurity in healthcare. We will talk about what it means and why it is important to know that cyber safety is patient safety. You will hear about healthcare as part of the United States critical infrastructure and how public-private partnerships play a role in the security and resilience of that critical infrastructure. We are also sharing how the US Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, in collaboration with our healthcare and public health sector partners, is implementing a key piece of legislation to align healthcare industry security practices. Erik will be diving into the cornerstone publication that was developed and released under this effort. We will also touch on the new Public Law 116.321 that was passed in early January 2021 regarding recognized security practices. We will also discuss why cybersecurity risks should be part of an organization's wide spectrum of core risks as part of enterprise risk management. Let's start with the state of the healthcare and public health sector in the United States and around the world. We all know that cyber threats to the global healthcare and public health sectors continue to rise. And the global healthcare cybersecurity market will grow by 15% year over year over the next 5 years. And it will reach about 125 billion cumulatively from 2020 to 2025. I also want to recognize that in 2020, the number of ransomware attempts against the healthcare industry rose by 123%. In 2020 alone, 92 individual ransomware attacks affected over 600 separate clinics, hospitals, and organizations, and more than 18 million patient records. The cost of these attacks, it is important to note, is inclusive of paid ransoms, lost revenue and fees, and the costs to rebuild that lost data and get our environments into a good known state. So cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. I think we've heard that a lot across the globe, not just in the United States. It is a team effort. And of course, for the health industry, it is fundamentally about patient safety and uninterrupted care delivery. We know that cyber attacks impacts clinical operations, patient care, and of course, again, patient safety. It has led to diversion of patients, total shutdowns, and compromised patient data. I will say it again. Cyber safety is patient safety. It is not solely an IT issue also. It is an enterprise issue. It impacts our mission, our business, and our programs. One thing to consider as we go through our session today is treating cyber attacks similarly to other disasters or hazards, having our emergency management and procedures in lockstep with our cybersecurity practices and activities. When a cyber attack does occur, it is also important for everyone to know their roles and responsibilities within their healthcare facilities and organizations during a response. And you will hear from Erik and myself that that could include contingencies like paper processes, having your communication plans in place, and knowing where to obtain your data during the attack and after as you get into your recovery phase. One other statistic that I wanted to mention is in the US alone, a multitude of healthcare entities fell victim to ransomware this year and last year in 2020. And again, it led to diversion of patients. And sometimes we know that is not an option if it is a regional impact when there is a cyber attack. Critical infrastructure sectors in the United States. There are 16 designated critical infrastructure sectors. And what this means is those assets, systems, and networks, whether physical or virtual, are considered so vital to the United States that their incapacitation and destruction would have debilitating effect on security, national economic security, public health or safety, and a combination thereof. We also have our Presidential Policy Directive, PPD 21, where it calls for critical infrastructure security and resilience and advances a national policy to strengthen and maintain secure, functioning, and resilient in critical infrastructure. It is also important to know it is National Critical Infrastructure Security and Resilience Month here in the US. And what that means also is we are re-emphasizing, and advocating that there are 4 to the security and resilience of these critical infrastructures. That is government, industry, emergency management, and security. For healthcare and public health sector, we are one of the designated critical infrastructures here in the US. So we not only need to secure our sector from natural disasters, infectious disease outbreaks, and physical attacks, we must now also protect it more than ever from cyber threats. So what is the importance of public-private partnerships? We hear this a lot in the US. I've heard it a lot when I've spoken through other forums in a global setting. And if there is a key takeaway from my remarks today, is the importance of that partnership. It is a collaboration and a forum for sharing information between government and private sector partners. It is a way of addressing the threat of cybersecurity, because we all know that it requires a broad collaborative approach and a coalition of partners to enhance cybersecurity within the US and globally. One such public-private partnership that you will hear today is the Joint Cybersecurity Working Group. This group includes representatives from government and industry and has a vast membership inclusive of information technology specialists, legal, operational, C-suite, and more. The important thing here is this group develops and encourages adoption of recommendations and guidance for policy, regulatory, and market-driven strategies to facilitate that collective mitigation of cybersecurity risks. Within this work group is numerous, or it has a lot of collaborative task groups, as we call it. And one such task group is the 405D task group that Erik will dive into in a moment. This has supported a significant part of the HHS 405D program, which is a result of this true collaboration and partnership between HHS, which is the government, and the private sector. Our mission for the 405D program is to be the collaborative center for HHS to work with their private sector partners to ensure that we are, one, fulfilling the mandate of the legislation that I will speak about in the next slide, but also to make sure that we are collaborating across our federal partners, our private sector partners, to solve and develop a consensus-based set of mitigating practices to the cyber threats that we see today. HHS began this approach in response to a legislation called the Cybersecurity Act of 2015. Under that act is a specific section called 405D, and it calls for HHS to convene a public-private partnership to align industry approaches by developing a common set of voluntary, consensus-based, industry-led cybersecurity guidelines, methodologies, procedures, processes that the entire sector can use. This effort started in 2017, and I'm happy to say that it is growing strong and still making progress with a lot of the resources and publications that we work with our sector partners. I will now turn it over to my co-lead, Erik Decker, to go through what the task group is doing and what that task group is developing to date.
Thanks, Julie. It's a pleasure to be here, everybody. Lisa, if you could go back one slide, I just want to highlight a little bit of the history of the 405D task group. So as Julie mentioned, we formed together in 2017, and there was, I vividly remember this, the opening meeting had about 70 of us involved that we met there in Washington, DC. And over the next 18 months or so, heads down, worked diligently, brought in many other members of the task group. And ultimately, I think we had upwards of about 200 to 250 task group members towards the end of 2018 when we released our first publication, which is the Health Industry Cybersecurity Practices, Managing Threats and Protecting Patients document. So we affectionately call this HICCUP. It's very easy, very light, sort of to bring up. And I'll dive into HICCUP here in a moment, but this document was produced right at the tail end of 2018. It was about, I think, December 28th, and a fantastic document to help, as Julie mentioned, move the needle across the healthcare industry. So really getting down to the root of what are some of the most compelling issues that we're facing and some of the most pragmatic threats that we can, the most pragmatic remediation items that we can take in order to manage them. One of the cornerstones of our mission within the 405D program, as Julie mentioned before, this is a public-private partnership. So I represent the industry side of that partnership, and Julie represents the federal side. And having that voice amongst industry, having that pragmatic approach, having a very actionable approach is very core, to the work that we do. So as we moved throughout the years after our publication was released, that was just the beginning part of our journey. And very difficult, of course, to pull together a consensus-built document that we all agreed on and that could be released out there publicly. But that's, like I said, just the start. And so in 2019, we really focused in on what are a lot of the ways that we can release and deliver the content of HICCUP in different types of channels, different ways that our industry can consume it. Picking up the full volume when you read it, if you would read it front to back, is about 200 some pages long. So that's hard, to take a look at and read it page by page. And so we really wanted to make it a lot more accessible. And so 2019 kicked that off. And then now as we move into beyond HICCUP and where we are today, we're going to talk about this later, but really focusing in on some new materials and new publications. So the things that are in development, we're working on an enterprise risk management guide that's based on NIST's 8286 publication. So really looking at, again, sort of a practical approach on how one can adopt cyber into existing ERM frameworks and existing ERM models. And we really want to help get beyond the think and into the pragmatic approach and guide folks in that way. And we've also, in the midst of the pandemic, last year, the Sector Coordinating Council and the Joint Cyber Working Group that Julie mentioned before, there's about 19 to 20 plus task groups that exist within that public-private partnership. Now, not all of those task groups are actually sponsored or supported by the federal government. Some of it is just on the industry side. But when we come together under that federal partnership, we have a lot of extra flexibility and things that we can do. And so with COVID having launched, we found a lot of folks scrambling, trying to understand from a cyber perspective, well, what do we do in the middle of all of this? How do we protect our environments? Everybody's working from home. So what does that mean? And how do we help the industry not have to reinvent the wheel on what that looks like? So we made an assumption, that there may or may not be crisis management guides, within your organizations already. And very quickly with a Tiger team, pulled together this tactical crisis guide, which we call HIC Ticker. And so what we're doing right now within 405D is we're actually taking that guide and wrapping that in to the 405D context and updating it. So one of our mandates as well within the Cybersecurity Act of 2015 is that once we release these publications, we have to maintain them. That as we all know, cyber changes daily. Even though Hiccup is 3 years old now, it's stale in a few places. So we're actually also in the process of finalizing our update to Hiccup, our version 2, and we should have that hopefully released here within the next few months. So this task group, as Julian mentioned, and I just kind of talked about, it's public-private partnership. That I think the true power of this group is bringing the collective think together and bringing the peer review process together. So anybody can go out there and write a white paper, bring their own thoughts to bear, have an individual opinion about a problem. The challenge is the agreement and the consistency and the priority of those recommendations, and how, within cyber, you can do any number of things, lots of different angles, lots of different, channels you can adopt. And the getting to consensus is actually quite hard. But consensus, when you go through this process and you go through the peer review, you go through the vetting, you go through the debate, and when we release a publication within 405D, we start with individual authors within the task group who are building this. Then we go into an internal peer review process within the group. We debate it. We pick apart various areas of content. We talk through that. We get to an agreement there. Then we release it into the larger Joint Cyber Working Group for their opinion. And same kind of thing. It goes through some debate and such. And then with HHS actually helps support a non-public-private partnership view, so a non-task group view or joint working group view, and brings this out to pilot or test case throughout the country. And we go through, fresh eyes, people who've never seen this before, and we get beat up on it again. And so we take that feedback, we redline, we synthesize, and we focus. And by the time that's done, we have a product that's not one voice, but a collective voice, and something that everybody agrees is the right thing to do. And so I think that's really the true uniqueness of this task group, I think, and the power of it. So I'll talk a bit of Hiccup here a bit. As I mentioned, it's our cornerstone document. It's about 200 some pages, 3 volumes with an appendix, where the main document, is, as we were building all of this, we were trying to consider the audience. Who are the people we want to reach, and how do we tackle this challenge, which for a large integrated delivery network like Intermountain Healthcare, which is where I'm the CISO for, our challenges are very different from the small radiology practice, that might have just a few radiologists and such. very different dynamics, very different challenges, very different set of skills and resources, and very different competency of cyber. Just the language itself. And who's there to help support that. So we spent a good amount of time on like, how are we going to build something that can reach everybody and still get practical, still get actionable, and still have a meaningful impact. So we broke this up into these 3 core volumes. The main document is really focusing on the non-IT person. It's the executive, it's the clinician, it's the support people, the support staff, within the provider space or wherever, who are not versed in tech, it's hard to understand this cyber challenge, this very opaque and challenging concept. And so within the main document and the way that we actually built all of Hiccup was we centered it around this concept of, let's agree to 5 threats that everybody faces within healthcare. Let's get to an understanding of what those 5 threats are. And then let's choose the best top 10 practices that would mitigate those 5 threats. So that's the main document. That's Hiccup. That's really how everything is centered, when you look at this document. And so when we got to that agreement, so 5 threats, 10 practices, that's fine. But again, as I mentioned, the way you solve for this in a small size organization is very different than you do in a very large conglomerate integrated delivery network. And so we agreed that we had to stratify those 10 practices based on the size of the organization that you are. So technical volume 1 and technical volume 2 is what that is. So tech 1 is focusing on the small. So we took those 10 practices and we built some sub practices underneath them, and we messaged it incredibly, focused and specific to that under-resourced, probably doesn't even have IT on staff, organization. What do you do? Then in tech volume 2, we looked at medium and large, so, like the medium could be a critical access hospital or a safety net hospital or a rural hospital or something along those lines, or a large medical practice, that might have 50 to 100, physicians or something along those lines. They might have IT people already, maybe not cyber, specifically, but they've got IT and they've got some resources around that. So we built some sub practices around the mediums, and then for the large, we said, all right, you should be doing the medium. Let's start with that assumption, and then we will go to then there's extra things to focus on because of the complexity of the ecosystem. And large size organizations have dedicated teams, dedicated cyber professionals, probably a little bit more of an astute executive leadership team that understands some of these principles and so forth. So that's Hiccup, in a nutshell, is multifaceted, multi-audience, and so forth. So the 5 threats that we focused in on and the 10 practices you can see here. I won't read all the practices, but 5 threats. Email phishing, not a surprise. It's the most ubiquitous way to break into an organization, and we definitely felt it was important to focus on that. Ransomware, of course, as Julie mentioned, it has been a very bad last 24 months, and in some cases last fall was horrendous. This year alone, the number of attacks has spiked and increased. And the thing to think about with ransomware is just my sort of own aside, is it is the weapon that is deployed as a human targeted attack, generally speaking. So the extorters have gotten into your environment, they've broken in, they've used phishing, they made their entry point, they've moved laterally. Perhaps they used an IoT device, in the midst of all of this, or they leverage an IoT device as a means of moving laterally and finding more interesting, areas to get privileged access. And then once they get that privileged access, they understand what those assets are. That's going to cause the most impact. Then they weaponize malware and they push it out. So it's not, like you click a button and then suddenly ransomware appears in your network. There is a human element to this, but they're very good at it, incredibly good at it. So, and it's very dangerous. So that was the second one. The third is lost or stolen devices or data. And connect against medical devices this is the thing that we understood within healthcare is IoT and the Internet of Medical Technology, we use medical technology consistently, constantly within hospitals, of course, patient bedside monitors, and so forth. And the way that you manage that is, it has to be, with white gloves, because the equipment has a very specific clinical intention, and you can't break the clinical use of it. And so there's a lot of quality check and things that have to go into that. But at the same time, they're vulnerable to these attacks. So specific use cases there, we actually built an entire practice around how to do medical device security, which is practice 9. Let's move forward a slide. So when you think about the full of hiccup, there's actually upwards, I think, of 89 sub practices across both of those volumes. But it's not intended to be a document that you pick up and then you implement literally every single thing inside of it. We think of hiccup as a recipe book. It's a cookbook. We've got all these different ingredients to solve for a problem. The problem could be mitigating phishing, as we talked about here. And so there's all these different, sub practices that exist within hiccup that are going to do elements of that. Some of it are going to do it directly. Some of them are going to do it indirectly. So multi-factor authentication directly helps mitigate phishing. Most important control that you should be implementing, period, anywhere in your environment, and also to help protect your IoT space, just because of the fact that that it's the most prominent vector into your organization. Incident response is incredibly important. It doesn't directly stop phishing, but your response to a phishing attack is going to have a lot of impact there. So just consider that. We actually built an Excel document and a toolkit that helps navigate the sub practices, and we show like which of these sub practices do we think directly mitigates one of those 5 threats, or which one of them indirectly mitigates or doesn't. Because not all of these practices actually potentially even mitigate one of the threats. I think, Julie, it's time for you now.
Thanks, Eric. So why enterprise risk management? Trying to shift gears a little bit. And the key thing to remember with what enterprise risk management is it is addressing your full spectrum of significant risks and opportunities, and considering that portfolio, and rather than addressing those risks within silos. We bring this up today. We brought this up in years prior because we know that it is very important. And sometimes this concept of ERM is quite a novel concept for some organizations, including those within the healthcare and public health sector. And what you see here is essentially what I just said: interrelated risks, mission impacts. ERM also supports credible decision-making, and also normalizes the risks across many domains. So let's talk about the normalizing risks. So for cybersecurity, we have a lot of data. There's so many ways that we are measuring. We have metrics, we have tools and technologies. However, we need to figure out and consider how those risks can translate into your financial risks, communication risks, reputation, compliance, etc. This is why the 405D program, as Erik just mentioned, is actively engaging our sector to ensure that that consideration is in the top of our board of directors' minds, our C-suites, those who are in the ERM space, and vice versa. And one of the main publications that we are working on today, as Erik mentioned also, is a cyber and ERM integration publication. It incorporates an organization's overall ERM strategy and considers that as part of your cyber risk management strategy. Erik will now go through quite a few of our new publications and what's happening. I think, Erik, you already mentioned some of these but I
Yeah,
think some
and
are still worth highlighting.
yeah, and I'll just do this fast because we do have one more topic. And I think we're coming close to time. So we talked about Hiccup. We talked about the enterprise risk management publication, which is coming out soon. As we built our marketing materials, we've worked on a post, which is there's a online newspaper essentially that is written. We spotlight an individual task member who has a particular topic of interest, and they will write about that topic. We actually have some IOMT publications within our post. We talk through those. We host every other month webinars on, again, specific topics of interest, and we bring the task group together. Lots of awareness and outreach and emails and pre-canned kind of things that the HHS team really helps us with. And then this new concept of the SBAR. This is a situation background analysis and recommendation construct. It's very common in healthcare to use the SBAR tool to deconstruct a problem and make it a little bit more approachable. So this is brand new. What we're doing is when there's an imminent issue that is being discussed or is a problem. So this could be a vulnerability that's being highly exploited. We help to bring together a specific recommendation about how to solve for that problem based on what Hiccup says. And we're putting some analysis around that, and then we dive into here's how Hiccup can help. This is some stuff that you should be doing, and some good best practice there. And then of course social media. At the end of this, if you ask 405D is the tag in a lot of the LinkedIn and Twitter platforms, we would certainly love for you to join us there.
And I think in terms of policy and regulation, as I mentioned earlier in my remarks, we do have a new law that was passed, and essentially it recognizes as security practices everything that is promulgated and developed within the 405D program. We are very encouraged by this law, and it also gives light into really focusing and making sure that our healthcare and public health sector includes cybersecurity in their strategy, includes it as top of mind. And I think, as I was seeing in the chat, Internet of Things, it's all interconnected. So I wouldn't say that all these best practices or things that are in Hiccup, enterprise risk management, does not consider Internet of Things. I think it's actually the opposite. I would emphasize that a lot of the incidents and attacks really hone in on what those basic cyber hygiene practices were not implemented. What were those basic cyber practices were not in place. So I encourage the audience to take a look at all the work that the 405D program has developed. We also encourage participating in your own public-private partnerships, wherever country you are from, because I'm sure there are certain opportunities that are available to you.
If I could just
Sure.
take one of the questions here where OT, operational technology, fits in. So the one thing that I just want to talk about is within Hiccup, practice 9 focuses entirely on medical device security. So these are the IoT space. And we talk about how to do asset management, how to do vulnerability management, how to do network segmentation, the access management, like what are the specifics associated to how you manage those devices. So take a look at that if you can. Within the Joint Cyber Working Group as well, there are other task groups that are focused entirely 100% dedicated to medical tech. There's a joint security plan that was produced by the medical device manufacturers that helps build a framework for how you produce good product security. So the JSP is that moniker, if you want to take a look at that. There's also, they're tackling legacy devices, so how you manage through those issues and so forth. And I think that the great thing about the public law is it has amended HIPAA and high-tech to say, if you are doing a recognized cybersecurity practice, you'll get relief in the case of a compromise from our regulator, from the Office for Civil Rights, which I think is where Julia's going next. But I think, and as Julia had mentioned there, IoT is incredibly important, and it's one of the things in the ecosystem of technology that we have in our environments. And you have to consider the full spectrum of the ecosystem in order to secure this correctly, which is where ERM comes into play.
So the last piece of information that Erik and I group is we do have a whole slew of different resources and different avenues to reach us. We also encourage participation if you are interested. This is not solely a US effort. We do hope that it goes global and international in terms of participation. I think there was a question about interest in participating from the private sector side. We are more than happy to engage with you and see how you can get involved. And there was okay, and I think Erik already answered that chat question about HVAC and CCTV, et cetera. And I think that's where if we think broadly and take a step back, critical infrastructure is healthcare and public health sector. It is your electricity. It is your financial sector, energy sector, water, et cetera. So when you think of it in that lens, enterprise risk management always comes into play. It always comes into play also when we talk about the 4 pillars that I mentioned earlier: government, industry, emergency management, and security. All of those things, I'm sure if you are in the operational technology world, or if you are in the physical or cyber physical types of systems like industrial control systems, et cetera. That is why we need to make sure that cybersecurity is embedded or in collaboration with those risk management activities.